It was the kind of night that wrapped the world in silence. Raindrops dancing on the windows of an upscale restaurant, candles flickering gently, and soft jazz floating in the background like a forgotten memory. Inside the Grand Elion Hotel's rooftop lounge, where laughter usually echoed off marble walls and champagne sparkled in crystal glasses, one small sound shattered the calm, a muffled cry, quiet but sharp, like a wound tearing open. Lucas, a young waiter with eyes too tired for his age and hands worn from too much work, was collecting empty glasses near the back corner when he heard it. He paused, glanced over his shoulder, and caught a glimpse of a woman sitting alone by the window. Her face was turned away, but her shoulders trembled as if she were breaking silently. She didn't look like someone who cried in public. Her black satin dress shimmered with wealth, her heels were designer, and a diamond necklace rested delicately on her collarbone. But none of that matched the way her hand clutched the napkin like it was her last anchor to the world. Lucas hesitated. He'd been told 100 times. Don't get involved. Don't talk unless spoken to. Don't ask questions. Just serve, smile, and move. But something about her made him stop. Maybe it was the way she seemed so perfectly put together on the outside while completely falling apart within. Or maybe it was because he knew what it felt like to sit in silence, hoping someone would notice your pain without you having to speak it. Slowly, carefully, Lucas approached with a warm towel and a gentle, quiet voice. "Miss, would you like some water?" he asked, not out of duty, but genuine concern. She didn't answer right away. Her face remained hidden behind her hair, but she took the towel, held it tightly, and nodded. Lucas placed the glass on the table, his eyes scanning her face for just a second. What he saw haunted him. Her eyes were red but still stunning, her makeup smudged but elegant. She wasn't just sad, she was shattered. "I'll give you space," he whispered and stepped away. But he didn't go far. He returned to his tasks, yet his eyes kept drifting toward her. She didn't eat, didn't drink, just stared out the window as lightning flashed over the city skyline. Something in his chest ached. Maybe it was because she reminded him of his mother the night she learned their house was gone. Or maybe because, like him, she looked like someone who had lost everything but still showed up in a world that demanded a smile. Minutes passed. Then, without a sound, she stood up, wiped her face with the towel, and walked toward the exit. She paused for a breath at the doorway, as if her soul was too heavy to carry. Lucas felt the urge to stop her, to ask if she was okay, but the words caught in his throat. She disappeared into the elevator, and just like that, she was gone. He turned back to clean the table, only to notice something lying there. A small velvet clutch, elegant and expensive, with gold trim and a faint perfume of roses. He picked it up carefully, intending to hand it over to the lost and found, when he noticed a folded napkin sticking out from the side. It wasn't the one he'd given her. It was scribbled with faint ink, the handwriting shaky and wet with mascara stains. One line, barely readable. "I can't do this anymore. I'm sorry." Lucas froze. His heart dropped. Was she planning to? Number. He looked around, adrenaline kicking in, scanning the hallway she had just walked through. The elevator doors had closed, but a strange fear gripped him. Something felt off. He opened the clutch, not to invade her privacy, but to find her ID, anything to stop what he now feared. Inside was a sleek black card with embossed gold letters. Vivienne Caldwell, CEO, Caldwell Industries. Lucas's breath caught. His fingers trembled. This woman. She wasn't just anyone. She was a billionaire. One of the most powerful women in the city. What was a billionaire doing crying alone, leaving behind a message like that? His mind raced. He didn't know it yet, but that small moment, one act of kindness, one glass of water offered from the heart, was about to unravel a secret empire, trigger betrayal, romance, power plays, and expose a truth buried deep beneath money and lies. That night, Lucas didn't just serve a guest. He unknowingly stepped into a storm of secrets that would forever rewrite his life, and hers. Lucas didn't sleep that night. He sat on the edge of his old mattress in his shared apartment, clutching Vivienne's note like it was a bomb that could explode at any moment. Every word in that scribbled line echoed inside his head. I can't do this anymore. But why would a billionaire, someone who had everything, write such a heartbreaking message and vanish into the night? As the city lights dimmed and the early morning broke through cracked blinds, Lucas's thoughts drifted into the shadows of his past. The very past he had tried to outrun. His life had never been luxurious. Raised in the rough end of the city where broken windows and broken dreams were part of the view, Lucas had grown up watching his father work double shifts in construction while his mother cleaned offices in silence, her hands always red and swollen from bleach and scrubbing. Life never gave them comfort. And when cancer came for his mother, it didn't just take her. It took the savings, the apartment, and the last bit of light from his father's eyes. Lucas was 16 when he dropped out of school to take his first job as a dishwasher. Not because he wanted to, but because rent didn't care about dreams. And since then, life had been nothing but clocking in, clocking out, and surviving in between. The Grand Elion, where he now worked, wasn't just a fancy hotel to him. It was another world. A world where money solved everything, where people dressed their wounds in silk and perfume, and where his presence always felt invisible unless someone's glass was empty or their steak was cold. He never expected kindness from that world. He only tried to survive within it. But something about Vivienne's eyes last night stirred something in him. He'd seen sadness before. Hell, he lived with it. But hers was different. It was the kind of pain that came with betrayal, with pressure, with a silent scream no one else could hear. And maybe, deep down, it reminded him of himself. Because Lucas, too, had been broken. His heart wasn't untouched by life. He once fell in love with a girl named Naomi, who had dreams bigger than the city skyline. They used to sit on rooftops and plan imaginary futures, promising each other they'd make it out of poverty. But dreams don't always survive reality. When Naomi got a scholarship and left for another city, she begged him to come with her. Lucas couldn't. His father was sick again, and someone had to pay the bills. So he stayed behind and watched the love of his life walk away. Not because she wanted to, but because he had nothing to offer. No money, no degree, no way forward. She never came back. Since then, Lucas had stopped expecting happy endings. He moved like a ghost between tables, learned to smile without feeling it, and numbed himself to the glamour that surrounded him. But after meeting Vivienne, all those memories bubbled back up. The way someone can look perfect on the outside and be breaking on the inside. It felt too familiar. As he got ready for work the next day, tucking the note carefully into the back of his wallet, a strange sense of urgency gripped him. He had to find her. Not because she was rich, not because she was famous, but because something told him she didn't just leave behind a note. She left behind a cry for help, and maybe for the first time in years, Lucas wanted to be the one to answer it. Not as a waiter, not as someone from the background, but as a human being who knew what it meant to hurt and still show up. As he walked to work, the weight of the city felt heavier, the streets louder, and the luxury around him more hollow. But one thing was clear in his mind now. He wasn't going to let another soul fade into the darkness without trying to reach out. Because sometimes, even the most wounded people carry the strength to save someone else. And maybe, just maybe, Lucas was ready to stop surviving and start fighting back. Lucas arrived at the Grand Elion the next morning feeling a weight in his chest heavier than the trays he usually carried. Everything in the hotel was the same: polished marble floors, the scent of jasmine diffusers, the soft jazz playing in the background, but something inside him had shifted. Vivienne wasn't just a guest who had a breakdown. She was someone who left behind a message meant to be heard by someone, and Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that maybe it was meant for him. As he moved through the lobby, greeting the front desk with a tight smile, he couldn't help but glance toward the bar where he'd seen her last night. The corner booth was empty. No purse, No scarf. Nothing but a single folded linen napkin, the kind they only used for VIPs. Curiosity tugged at him. On instinct, he walked over and picked it up. At first it seemed ordinary, until he turned it over and saw a faint lipstick smudge near the edge, and just below it, an address scribbled in a rushed, almost trembling hand. It was barely legible, but it was enough. He stared at it like it was a secret only he had access to. Suddenly, he wasn't just a waiter anymore. He was holding a thread that could unravel something far deeper, but he couldn't act immediately. The manager was watching, so he stuffed the napkin into his pocket and tried to work through the day as usual. But nothing felt usual. Not when your mind is spinning with questions. Why would someone like Vivienne be crying alone at midnight in a place like this? Why leave behind a note and an address unless she wanted someone to follow? And why him? By noon, whispers were spreading among the hotel staff. The woman who caused a scene last night was no ordinary guest. She was Vivienne Rose Sinclair, heiress to the Sinclair Group, a massive media and tech empire that controlled half the news, apps, and streaming in the country. Billionaire by birth, socialite by title. But from what Lucas saw last night, she was none of those things. She was scared, alone, and running from something. He thought maybe security would come asking about her, or that some rich fiancé in a suit would barge in demanding answers. But no one did. It was like she vanished. And for the first time, Lucas realized just how wide the gap was between his world and hers. In his world, people disappeared, and no one cared. In hers, people disappeared, and headlines followed. Except this time, there were no headlines, no alerts, just silence. And that silence made the contrast louder. While Vivienne had bodyguards and black cars and private elevators, Lucas had a rusted bike and leftover pasta in his fridge. While she had designer bags, he recycled old shoes with holes in them. While she likely flew in from Paris last week, he hadn't left his city in years, but none of that mattered now, because whatever line divided their worlds was starting to blur. That napkin in his pocket proved it. And yet, as the day wore on, Lucas couldn't ignore the voices around him. One of the servers laughed. "You think she dropped that note for you, man? Come on, people like her don't even see people like us." Another said, "Maybe she's just crazy rich and crazy, period. Not your problem." But something in Lucas refused to let go. Maybe it was his past clawing up from the dark, the part of him that still remembered what it felt like to be left behind, unheard. Maybe he saw a reflection of Naomi in Vivienne, someone who had to walk away because life didn't give her a choice. Or maybe it was something deeper, something unexplainable, a pull, a knowing, a gut instinct that this moment was bigger than it seemed. That night, when his shift ended and the hotel lights dimmed into gold, Lucas pulled out the napkin again. He stared at the address. It wasn't a mansion or estate. It was in an old part of the city, where old brownstones stood in quiet defiance of the glass towers surrounding them. That didn't make sense. Why would someone like her be connected to a place like that? He didn't have answers, only questions, and a heartbeat that wouldn't slow down. So he took a deep breath, changed into his hoodie and jeans, and headed out. It was time to follow the only clue she left behind. As he pedaled through the city streets, dodging taxis and neon signs, the weight of everything pressed against him. His poverty, his insignificance, the unlikeliness of this moment. But still, he moved forward. Because this wasn't just about her anymore. This was about him stepping out of the shadows, challenging the line that said someone like him didn't belong in stories like hers. And as he approached the old building on the corner of Harlow Street, heart pounding, he couldn't shake the feeling that nothing about his life was going to be the same after tonight. Rich or poor, visible or invisible, something had started, and it wouldn't stop until the truth came to light. Lucas stood frozen outside the brownstone, staring up at the chipped paint and faded windows like they were hiding a secret too old to name. The air smelled like rain and rust, and the soft flicker of a dying street lamp threw long shadows over the alley nearby. This wasn't the world Vivienne Sinclair belonged to. This was his. Yet here she was, hidden behind an address scrawled on a napkin, deep in the forgotten heart of the city. He checked the number again. 418. The door was slightly ajar, creaking gently with the wind. His gut twisted, unsure if this was a trap or something even more complicated. He could still turn around. He could still pretend none of this ever happened. But Lucas had crossed that line already. The second he touched that napkin, he'd stepped into something he couldn't walk away from. Quietly, he pushed the door open and stepped into the stairwell. The air was stale, filled with dust and echoes of arguments long past. He climbed 2 flights until he reached the hallway that matched the address. But before he could knock, he heard voices. A woman's and a man's, low and urgent. He moved closer, his heartbeat crashing in his ears. Through a thin slit in the cracked doorframe, he saw her. Vivienne. Her hair pulled back, eyes wild, body tense. She wasn't crying now. She was arguing. "You said it would be safe," she hissed. "You promised me I'd be protected if I left the hotel quietly." The man's voice was gravelly, older. "You don't get to complain now. You made your choice. Once you walk away from Sinclair, you're no longer untouchable." Lucas held his breath. Walked away from Sinclair? What did that even mean? He leaned closer. The man continued. "You have 3 days. After that, I can't help you anymore. You either expose the files, or you disappear for good." Files? What files? Lucas felt a chill crawl up his spine. This wasn't just about heartbreak or running from an engagement. This was bigger, corporate, maybe even criminal. The tone in the man's voice wasn't just threatening. It was final. "What about him?" Vivienne whispered. "The waiter. The one who saw me." Lucas froze. "He saw too much," the man said. "If he talks, we're all finished." Lucas staggered backward, his mind spinning. He turned and bolted down the hallway, his sneakers barely touching the floor. But as he reached the exit, the stairwell door swung open from below, and a figure stepped into view. Tall, dark jacket, eyes hidden behind tinted glasses. Not the man from inside, but someone else. Someone waiting. Lucas spun around, heart pounding, and darted toward the back of the building. The hallway twisted into a narrow corridor that led out to a side alley, damp and littered with broken crates. Just as he slipped through the exit, he heard footsteps behind him, fast, heavy, deliberate. He didn't look back. He ran. Rain started to fall in heavy sheets, turning the alley into a blur of metal and grime. He ducked behind a dumpster, chest heaving. His hands shook as he pulled out the napkin again, now smudged and wet. What the hell had he walked into? Moments later, the alley fell silent again. He waited, counting every second like it might be his last. When he finally emerged, soaked and shivering, he knew one thing for sure. Vivienne wasn't just in danger. She was part of something explosive. And now, so was he. He couldn't go to the police. Who would believe a broke waiter who eavesdropped on a billionaire heiress and a mystery man in a crumbling building? And yet, he couldn't walk away either. That look in her eyes, terrified, desperate, was still burned into his memory. He'd seen that look before. On his mother's face, the night she disappeared after testifying against a local politician. He'd been 12. The police never found her. No one looked, one cared. Now it felt like life had looped back around, dragging him into the kind of fight he thought he'd escaped. And for the first time in years, Lucas felt a strange surge in his chest. Not fear, not panic. Purpose. The kind that turns waiters into whistleblowers, into heroes, or corpses. He returned to his tiny apartment near the train tracks, locked the door, and opened his laptop. If she was hiding something, files, secrets, proof, it had to be digital. People like her didn't deal in paper trails. He searched for her name. Social pages, Press photos, charity events, gossip blogs. Everything painted her as a glamorous, reckless trust fund baby. But now he knew the truth. Beneath all that glitter was a girl drowning in secrets. He remembered the man's words. 3 days. Then you disappear. Which meant time was already running out. Lucas leaned back in his chair, rain tapping the window like ticking seconds, and whispered to himself, "What the hell did you get me into, Vivienne?" He didn't know the answer, but one thing was clear. This wasn't a coincidence. Their worlds had collided for a reason. And the deeper he fell into her mess, the more his own past started to surface like ghosts in the fog. Something was coming, and Lucas wasn't ready. But he also wasn't backing down. Lucas stood frozen outside the brownstone, staring up at the chipped paint and faded windows like they were hiding a secret too old to name. The air smelled like rain and rust, and the soft flicker of a dying street lamp threw long shadows over the alley nearby. This wasn't the world Vivienne Sinclair belonged to. This was his. Yet here she was, hidden behind an address scrawled on a napkin, deep in the forgotten heart of the city. He checked the number again. 418. The door was slightly ajar, creaking gently with the wind. His gut twisted, unsure if this was a trap or something even more complicated. He could still turn around. He could still pretend none of this ever happened. But Lucas had crossed that line already. The second he touched that napkin, he'd stepped into something he couldn't walk away from. Quietly, he pushed the door open and stepped into the stairwell. The air was stale, filled with dust and echoes of arguments long past. He climbed 2 flights until he reached the hallway that matched the address. But before he could knock, he heard voices, a woman's and a man's, low and urgent. He moved closer, his heartbeat crashing in his ears. Through a thin slit in the cracked doorframe, he saw her. Vivienne, her hair pulled back, eyes wild, body tense. She wasn't crying now. She was arguing. "You said it would be safe," she hissed. "You promised me I'd be protected if I left the hotel quietly." The man's voice was gravelly, older. "You don't get to complain now. You made your choice. Once you walk away from Sinclair, you're no longer untouchable." Lucas held his breath. "Did you walk away from Sinclair?" What did that even mean? He leaned closer. The man continued. "You have 3 days. After that, I can't help you anymore. You either expose the files, or you disappear for good." Files? What files? Lucas felt a chill crawl up his spine. This wasn't just about heartbreak or running from an engagement. This was bigger, corporate, maybe even criminal. The tone in the man's voice wasn't just threatening, it was final. "What about him?" Vivienne whispered. "The waiter. The one who saw me." Lucas froze. "He saw too much," the man said. "If he talks, we're all finished." Lucas staggered backward, his mind spinning. He turned and bolted down the hallway, his sneakers barely touching the floor. But as he reached the exit, the stairwell door swung open from below, and a figure stepped into view. Tall, dark jacket, eyes hidden behind tinted glasses. Not the man from inside, but someone else. Someone waiting. Lucas spun around, heart pounding, and darted toward the back of the building. The hallway twisted into a narrow corridor that led out to a side alley, damp and littered with broken crates. Just as he slipped through the exit, he heard footsteps behind him, fast, heavy, deliberate. He didn't look back. He ran. Rain started to fall in heavy sheets, turning the alley into a blur of metal and grime. He ducked behind a dumpster, chest heaving. His hands shook as he pulled out the napkin again, now smudged and wet. What the hell had he walked into? Moments later, the alley fell silent again. He waited, counting every second like it might be his last. When he finally emerged, soaked and shivering, he knew one thing for sure. Vivienne wasn't just in danger. She was part of something explosive. And now, so was he. He couldn't go to the police. Who would believe a broke waiter who eavesdropped on a billionaire heiress and a mystery man in a crumbling building? And yet, he couldn't walk away either. That look in her eyes, terrified, desperate, was still burned into his memory. He'd seen that look before. On his mother's face, the night she disappeared after testifying against a local politician. He'd been 12. The police never found her. No one looked. No one cared. Now it felt like life had looped back around, dragging him into the kind of fight he thought he'd escaped. And for the first time in years, Lucas felt a strange surge in his chest. Not fear, not panic. Purpose. The kind that turns waiters into whistleblowers, into heroes, or corpses. He returned to his tiny apartment near the train tracks, locked the door, and opened his laptop. If she was hiding something, files, secrets, proof, it had to be digital. People like her didn't deal in paper trails. He searched for her name, social pages, press photos, charity events, gossip blogs. Everything painted her as a glamorous, reckless trust fund baby. But now he knew the truth. Beneath all that glitter was a girl drowning in secrets. He remembered the man's words. 3 days. Then you disappear. Which meant time was already running out. Lucas leaned back in his chair, rain tapping the window like ticking seconds, and whispered to himself, "What the hell did you get me into, Vivienne?" He didn't know the answer, but one thing was clear. This wasn't a coincidence. Their worlds had collided for a reason, and the deeper he fell into her mess, the more his past started to surface like ghosts in the fog. Something was coming, and Lucas wasn't ready. But he also wasn't backing down. The next morning, Lucas could still taste the metallic tang of fear in his mouth. His apartment felt smaller somehow, suffocating under the weight of what he had just uncovered. As he shuffled through his usual routine, the events of the previous night echoed in his mind. Vivienne Sinclair, the files, the mysterious man, the danger. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at it. No messages. Of course, who would be texting him? He was just a waiter with nothing but a past he couldn't outrun. But then his heart skipped a beat. A new email popped up from an unknown address. The subject line read, "We need to talk. Meet me at 2 p.m. at the coffee shop near your place." Lucas didn't hesitate. He knew it was Vivienne. Who else could it be? No one else knew what had happened. Or maybe they did, and this was a trap. Yet, deep down, he felt something stir, an undeniable pull. It wasn't just curiosity. It was more. A strange, unexplainable connection that had grown between them ever since he'd heard her desperate cries in the alley. He had no idea why, but his gut told him that this wasn't a coincidence. She needed him. And for the first time in his life, Lucas felt like someone truly needed him. He put on a hoodie, shoved his phone into his pocket, and made his way to the coffee shop. His mind raced with possibilities. What was Vivienne's game? She was rich, powerful, and untouchable. She didn't need a lowly waiter to fix her problems. Yet, here she was, reaching out to him. The shop was busy when he arrived, buzzing with chatter, the scent of fresh coffee beans filling the air. He spotted her immediately, sitting in the corner booth by the window. Her blonde hair was loose, falling perfectly over her shoulders, her makeup flawless as always. But today, something was different. She wasn't the confident socialite that everyone knew. She looked vulnerable, a far cry from the icy, untouchable woman she portrayed in public. Her eyes met his as he approached, and for a moment, Lucas saw a flicker of relief. "You came," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the clatter of cups and voices around them. He slid into the seat across from her, not saying a word. There was too much to say, too much unknown. But Vivienne didn't wait. She took a deep breath and looked straight at him. "I'm sorry about last night. I never meant to drag you into this. But you were the only one who could help." Lucas felt his throat tighten. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. She was apologizing? A woman like her? He had always imagined people like Vivienne never apologized. They had everything they wanted at their fingertips, from money to power to influence. But there she was, sitting across from him, vulnerable and desperate. The weight of her gaze was enough to make him reconsider everything. The world he had known, the distance he had kept from the elite, none of it mattered anymore. "What is this all about?" he asked, his voice low but with urgency. "Who was that man? What files are you talking about? Why do they want to silence you?" She hesitated, her fingers curling around her coffee cup. Her hands shook slightly, and Lucas noticed how she seemed to shrink under the weight of it all. He had never seen anyone so powerful, yet so broken. She looked down, then back at him, eyes filled with unshed tears. "I'm in deeper than I ever thought I was," she admitted. "My family, they aren't who they seem. The Sinclair name? It's built on lies, corruption, my father's business deals, my mother's charity fronts. They've been hiding the truth for years. And now," she stopped, her voice catching in her throat. "Now I've seen things I can't unsee, files that could bring everything down." Lucas leaned in, his mind racing. Everything she was saying didn't make sense. A rich family involved in corruption? It felt like a movie script, a plot too insane to believe. But the sincerity in her eyes, the raw vulnerability in her voice, it made him want to believe her. "I thought they were untouchable," she continued. "But someone is trying to expose them, and they're willing to do anything to keep me quiet. That man last night, he's not the only one watching me. If I don't do what they say, they'll ruin my life. But if I do, they'll destroy everything I stand for." Lucas's mind was reeling. This wasn't just about a runaway bride or a tragic love story. This was a ticking time bomb, and he was at the center of it. He couldn't look away now. He couldn't turn his back on her. Not when she needed him this much. She needed someone who wasn't afraid to fight back. And for some strange reason, Lucas felt like he was that person. She looked at him, almost as if reading his thoughts. "You're wondering why a waiter, right?" she asked, a faint smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "I never wanted you involved, Lucas. But I've realized something. You're different. I see it in your eyes. You don't want anything from me. You don't care about my name, my money. You're real." The words hung in the air like a confession. Lucas didn't respond. There was no need. He didn't need her validation. He didn't need to prove himself. All that mattered now was that, somehow, they were in this together. He had never felt this kind of weight before, this feeling of shared responsibility. For the first time in his life, he was no longer alone. And with that realization, something in him shifted. "Okay," he said, his voice steady. "Tell me what we need to do." Vivienne let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. She nodded, relieved but still afraid. "We need to find out who's after the files and why they're targeting me. But we have to be careful. One wrong move, and everything we've worked for, everything you've done for me, will be gone." Lucas stared at her, his heart pounding with a new sense of purpose. She was right. But they weren't just fighting for the files anymore. They were fighting for their lives, for everything they believed in. The rest of the world had no idea what was coming. But Lucas, he was ready. And with that, he stood up, his chair scraping the floor. Vivienne followed, her eyes locked on him, a mixture of gratitude and fear swimming in her gaze. "I won't let them take you down," he promised, his voice full of resolve. "Not while I'm here." The words, simple as they were, carried a weight that neither of them could escape. A connection had been forged, one born of secrets, survival, and the fragile trust between them. It wasn't love yet, but it was something deeper. It was the kind of connection that could change everything. Lucas barely slept that night. The weight of the last few days hung heavy on him, and the conversation with Vivienne replayed over and over in his mind. What had he gotten himself into? The calm he'd once found in his simple life was gone, replaced by the swirling chaos of a world he didn't understand. Yet despite the danger, despite everything telling him to walk away, there was something that kept pulling him back. There was Vivienne. Her vulnerability, her strength, and the look in her eyes, the way she trusted him even when she had no reason to, kept him tethered. He didn't have answers. He didn't even know if he was making the right choice. But he knew he couldn't leave her to face this alone. She needed him. And for the first time in his life, Lucas needed someone too. As the sun rose, he dressed quickly, trying to shake off the gnawing uncertainty that clung to him. He had no idea what the day would bring, but he knew he had to meet her again. She'd asked him to come to her family's estate, a sprawling mansion hidden behind tall iron gates. It felt like stepping into another world, a world of luxury he had never belonged to, a world he couldn't even imagine. He arrived, his heart beating faster with each step toward the grand entrance. Vivienne was already waiting for him, standing outside by the marble steps, her expression unreadable. As soon as she saw him, she walked toward him, and for the first time in their brief acquaintance, Lucas noticed how fragile she seemed. The walls that had once stood so tall around her were crumbling, and he could see the cracks in her armor. She wasn't the powerful woman he had first met. She was a person, a scared woman, trying to navigate a storm she couldn't control. "Lucas," she said, her voice low, almost hesitant, "I need to talk to you about something." He nodded, his pulse quickening. This wasn't just another meeting. Something was different. She led him inside, through the massive foyer that looked like something straight out of a movie. Marble floors, towering columns, golden chandeliers. This was the kind of life that people dreamed of, the kind that was so out of reach it seemed almost unreal. But Vivienne didn't seem to care about any of it anymore. They sat down in a small, private sitting room, away from the prying eyes of the household staff. The air felt heavy, as if the space itself knew that the conversation that was about to take place would change everything. Vivienne took a deep breath and looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resolve. "There's something I haven't told you," she said, her words soft but urgent. "Something I should have said the first time I asked for your help." Lucas leaned forward, his gaze never leaving hers. "What is it?" he asked, his voice steady. He wasn't sure what to expect, but his instincts told him this wasn't going to be a casual confession. Vivienne hesitated for a moment, her eyes darting to the window as if looking for something, perhaps some kind of reassurance. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm in danger, Lucas. Not just from the people after me, but from my own family. My father, he's not the man you think he is. He's been involved in things, in business deals that have crossed dangerous lines. And now, he's trying to clean up his mess. And I'm stuck in the middle of it." The words hit Lucas like a punch to the gut. He had known Vivienne's family was powerful, but this was something else. Her father was part of the darkness she was running from. That wasn't just betrayal. It was something far more dangerous. Vivienne's eyes met his, and in them, Lucas saw the vulnerability that had been hidden behind her bravado. "I need you, Lucas," she continued, her voice shaking slightly. "I need you to be my shield." The words hung in the air, thick with meaning. Lucas stared at her, his mind spinning. "What do you mean?" He had expected many things: danger, intrigue, even a plan. But this felt like a plea, a desperate cry for help from someone who had nowhere else to turn. "You're the only person who hasn't asked for something from me," Vivienne said, her voice raw. "Everyone else wants something: money, power, information, but you—" She stopped, taking a shaky breath. "You've never asked for anything, and that's why I need you. You're the only one who can help me without expecting something in return. I need you to protect me, to be the one person who can keep me safe from my family's mess. I don't know what they're capable of, but I know they'll do anything to protect themselves, and if they know I've told you everything, they'll come for you too." Lucas's heart pounded in his chest. He wasn't a bodyguard. He wasn't trained for this. He was a waiter. A man who had spent most of his life avoiding conflict, running away from trouble. He had never imagined that one day he would be asked to shield someone from the very people who could ruin them. But looking at Vivienne, seeing the fear in her eyes, the trust in her voice, he knew there was no turning back. He couldn't leave her to face this alone. Not now. Not when she had come to him, trusting him with her life. "What do you need me to do?" he asked, his voice steady despite the whirlwind in his mind. Vivienne reached across the table, taking his hand in hers, her fingers trembling slightly. "Stay by my side. Help me get the files. Help me figure out who's after me. But most importantly, protect me. Don't let them get to me. I can't do this without you." The weight of her words pressed on him, but there was something else there, too. A connection. A bond between them that had been formed in the heat of the moment, in the face of danger. And despite his doubts, despite the overwhelming uncertainty, Lucas knew he couldn't back down now. He had become part of something much bigger than himself. He had become her shield. And maybe, just maybe, he had found a purpose he never thought he needed. "I won't let them hurt you," he said, his voice firm with resolve. Vivienne squeezed his hand, her eyes softening as she gazed at him. "Thank you," she whispered. But Lucas could see the fear still lurking behind her eyes. She was strong, yes, but she wasn't invincible. She was in way too deep, and so was he now. But as he looked at her, something inside him shifted. He wasn't just protecting her. He was protecting everything she represented. The truth, the justice, the love that he had never thought he would find. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear. Their lives were no longer separate. They were in this together, and he would do whatever it took to keep her safe. The days following their pact had been a blur. Lucas found himself entrenched in a world he'd never imagined, surrounded by luxury, deceit, and danger. He wasn't just her shield anymore. He was tangled in the web of Vivienne's life, his every move watched, scrutinized. His once simple existence had transformed into something unrecognizable, where even his quiet moments felt like they were under siege. The stakes were high, and every decision felt like it could tip the scale. He wasn't sure how to navigate this new reality. The tension between them was thick. There was an unspoken connection, something more than just the promise to protect her. And he could see it in her eyes. Vivienne's trust in him was palpable, and the weight of that trust sometimes felt suffocating. Every time he looked at her, he could feel the pull of something deeper, a bond forged through shared vulnerability and the shared fear of an unknown future. But all of that, all of their careful plans, and the fragile alliance they had built, was about to unravel. It was an ordinary evening, at least it started that way. They had met to discuss the next steps, what to do with the files, how to stay one step ahead of her family's dangerous game. They had chosen a quiet cafe, tucked away from the public eye. They needed privacy, and they needed time. But what they didn't expect was the camera. Lucas hadn't seen it at first. It was a hidden lens, subtle, disguised as part of the cafe's decor. They were deep in conversation when it happened. Vivienne was speaking in hushed tones, and Lucas was leaning in, listening carefully. The atmosphere was tense, but there was comfort in the small space between them. For a brief moment, it felt like they were just two people trying to make sense of their worlds colliding. Then, suddenly, everything changed. A flash, a glimpse of light that felt like it pierced through the entire room. Neither of them saw it at first, but the damage had been done. The camera had captured a moment, a private moment, that they couldn't undo. As they left the cafe, unaware of the betrayal happening in the background, they were blissfully unaware of the storm that was about to hit. The footage was already circulating. By the time they got back to the mansion, it was everywhere. On social media, in news outlets, on the screens of millions. The headlines screamed at them. Billionaire's daughter caught having an affair with waiter, shocking twist. Vivienne's face was pale when she saw it. Her eyes darted to the screen, her heart sinking. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't planned for this. But there it was, playing on repeat, showing them together at the cafe. Too close. Too intimate for the world's standards. She couldn't breathe. The scandal was everywhere. They had been caught in a vulnerable moment. A moment that would be twisted beyond recognition. The world had assumed the worst. An affair, a romance, a scandal that threatened everything Vivienne had worked so hard to protect. Lucas felt the ground beneath him shift as the realization hit him. The world didn't care about the truth. They didn't care about the circumstances or the reasons behind their closeness. What mattered was the image. And in that moment, they had become nothing more than a sensational headline, a tabloid story for the world to consume. His mind raced as the implications began to sink in. What was he supposed to do now? He had always been a quiet observer of the world, never the center of attention. Now, he was thrust into the middle of a spectacle, caught between his own guilt and the harsh judgment of the public. It felt like the world had suddenly turned against them, like they were the stars of a cruel play they never auditioned for. Vivienne's voice was a whisper, but it was sharp, edged with panic. "They're all going to think we're in a relationship," she said, her eyes darting around as if the walls themselves might crumble under the pressure. "That's all they're going to see. That's all they're going to care about. They won't listen to the truth. They'll only see what they want to see." Lucas wanted to say something, wanted to reassure her, but he didn't know how. He didn't have answers. He didn't know how to fix this. The narrative had already been written for them, and it was one that neither of them had any control over. The world had already made its decision. It didn't matter if they were just two people caught in a moment of vulnerability. What mattered was the story, the scandal, the sensationalism. And now, they were both trapped in it. As the media frenzy escalated, Lucas felt the weight of Vivienne's world pressing down on him. The luxury, the money, the status. It had all come at a cost. She wasn't just the daughter of a billionaire. She was a target. And now, so was he. He was no longer just a waiter. He was a scandalous figure, an outsider in a world that didn't want him. The paparazzi were relentless, following them wherever they went, asking questions they weren't prepared to answer. But it wasn't just the media that was watching. Vivienne's father had heard about the scandal, and the repercussions were already beginning to unfold. The phone calls started coming in. Angry, threatening calls from people who didn't care about the truth, only the damage this could cause to their reputation. Vivienne tried to ignore them, but the tension in her voice told Lucas everything he needed to know. This wasn't just a scandal anymore. It was a threat to her entire world. The pressure of it all was overwhelming. He could see it in her eyes, the way she held herself together. But only just. She was barely keeping it together. And Lucas? He was scared too. He didn't belong in this world. He didn't belong at the center of this media storm. But he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't leave her now. Not when she needed him the most. They sat in silence for a long time after the chaos had begun. The weight of their situation settled between them like an unspoken truth. The world was watching, and they had no choice but to play along. To keep up the facade of a relationship. To shield themselves from the worst of the damage. It wasn't the truth. It wasn't the reality of what was happening between them. But it was the only way to survive. For now, they were trapped in a story they never wanted to be a part of. And it was a story they would have to finish, no matter where it took them. The days following the scandal were a blur of noise, pressure, and endless questions. Lucas could feel the weight of it all pressing down on him with every step he took. It wasn't just the flashing cameras or the constant whispers from the staff at the mansion. It was the way everything he had once known, everything he had once been, had changed. He wasn't the man he had been just a few weeks ago. He had been a simple waiter, living a life that was quiet and unnoticed. Now he was part of a circus, a spectacle for the world to consume, and the price for all of it was heavier than he could have ever imagined. Vivienne had asked him to be her shield, to protect her from a world that didn't care about the truth. But in the end, it wasn't just her that needed protecting. It was him too. The story had spiraled out of control, and the lies had grown deeper with each passing day. The media painted him as a villain, as the one who had seduced Vivienne and thrown her life into chaos. It didn't matter that they had been working together to protect her. It didn't matter that there had been no affair, no romance, no betrayal. All that mattered was the image. And the image was of a man who had nothing but ambition, trying to claw his way into a world that didn't belong to him. Every time Lucas looked at Vivienne, he saw the same fear in her eyes, the same uncertainty. She had once been so sure of herself, so confident in the world she had built around her. But now, she was lost too. Lost in a sea of expectations, obligations, and the constant pressure of being the perfect daughter. He had seen how she had crumbled under the weight of it all. How the mask of composure she wore was slowly slipping away. And it hurt him more than anything to see her like this. He had promised her he would protect her. But what had he done? He had become part of the mess, part of the lie. And the more he tried to help, the more he found himself caught in the web of her world, suffocating under the expectations of a life that wasn't his own. Lucas had always prided himself on being a man of integrity. He had always believed that his actions should speak louder than words, that his choices should reflect who he truly was. But now, as the media continued to drag his name through the mud, and as Vivienne's father threatened to ruin him, he felt like a fraud. He wasn't the man he had hoped to be. He wasn't even sure who he was anymore. And that was the hardest part of all. The truth was, he didn't belong here. Not in her world. Not in a life where everything was a spectacle, a performance for an audience that only wanted to see the drama unfold. He had never asked for any of this. He had never wanted to be part of a world so far removed from his own. He had never wanted to be the center of attention, the subject of gossip and judgment. But now, he had no choice. He had crossed a line, and there was no going back. There were moments, fleeting moments, when Lucas had imagined a life with Vivienne, when he had believed, even for just a second, that maybe there was something between them, something real. But those moments were gone now. They had been replaced by guilt, confusion, and a sense of betrayal. He couldn't stay. Not when it felt like everything he touched turned to dust. He had to walk away. The decision wasn't easy. He could still remember the look in Vivienne's eyes when he told her. It was a mix of disbelief and hurt. The kind of look that told him she didn't understand. But the truth was, he couldn't stay in this life. He couldn't keep pretending to be someone he wasn't. He needed to find himself again. He needed to escape the life that had swallowed him whole. And so, he walked away. He packed his things and left the mansion without a word to anyone. He didn't know where he was going or what he was going to do. He just knew he had to leave. He couldn't keep living a lie. It wasn't just the scandal that made him leave. It was the realization that, in trying to protect Vivienne, he had lost himself. He had lost the man he had once been. The man who believed in honor, in hard work, in making a difference. He wasn't that man anymore. And he needed to find him. As he stepped out into the night, the city around him felt like a strange, foreign place. The lights were bright, the streets were crowded, but he felt completely alone. The weight of his decision hit him hard, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. But it was too late to turn back now. The world had already moved on, and so had he. He walked down the street, each step feeling heavier than the last. The sound of his shoes echoed in the quiet night, and with each echo, he felt a little more distant from the life he had left behind. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't keep living in the shadow of someone else's world. He had to find his own path. And for the first time in a long time, Lucas felt like he was free. He didn't know if he would ever see Vivienne again. He didn't know if he would ever be able to fix what he had broken. But at that moment, as he walked away from the mansion and into the unknown, he realized that sometimes, In order to heal, you had to walk away from everything you thought you knew. You had to let go of the past and trust that, somewhere along the way, you would find yourself again. And maybe, just maybe, find a way to start over. But for now, all he could do was walk away and hope that, one day, he would find the peace he was searching for. Lucas wandered the streets, the weight of his decision pulling at him with every step. His heart felt as if it were being slowly crushed by an invisible hand, each beat reminding him of the life he had left behind. The mansion. Vivienne. The endless parties and public appearances that had seemed so glamorous at first. But now, as he walked through the city, he felt the sting of isolation and uncertainty. It was as if the world around him was a blur, a constant reminder of everything he had walked away from and everything he still couldn't escape. It wasn't the fame or the scandal that haunted him the most, it was the feeling that he didn't know who he was anymore. For so long, he had been just Lucas, the waiter with big dreams but no direction. He had always been the quiet observer, the man who stayed in the background, content with his modest life. But somewhere along the way, somewhere in the chaos of his recent life, he had lost sight of that man. The man he used to be. The man who had never asked for anything more than a simple, honest life. Now, he was nothing more than a stranger in his own skin. Each time he looked at his reflection, he saw a man who was still running, still chasing a dream that wasn't his. He had spent so many years trying to build a life based on the idea of success, of wealth, of status, of belonging to a world that was never meant for him. But in the end, it wasn't the world he wanted to be a part of. It was the people in it. And that's what had kept him stuck. He had been running from himself, running from the parts of him that were ashamed of his humble beginnings, ashamed of his simple aspirations. He had tried to be something he wasn't, and in doing so, he had lost everything that had once mattered. The problem was that he had never given himself the space to figure out who he truly was. He had let other people define him. The wealthy elite, the media, Vivienne's family. They had all told him who he should be, what he should want, and how he should live. And for a while, he had believed them. He had believed that in order to be worthy of love, respect, and success, he had to be more than just a waiter. But that wasn't true. It was a lie that he had told himself for far too long. And now, standing in the middle of the street, surrounded by the bustling noise of the city, Lucas felt the weight of that lie come crashing down on him. He wasn't running from Vivienne, or from the scandal, or even from the life that had trapped him in the mansion. He was running from himself, his own fears, insecurities, and the deep-rooted belief that he wasn't enough just as he was. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that his entire life had been built on the idea that success was defined by money and power. But he was starting to see that true success wasn't about the things he had accumulated or the title he held. It was about knowing who he was and being true to that person. He had spent years trying to be someone else, someone worthy of the world he had found himself in. But now, he had to face the truth. The real Lucas was the one who had come from nothing. The one who had worked hard. The one who had dreamed big. Not because he wanted wealth, but because he wanted a better life for himself and those he loved. The truth was, he had never really been content with the world he had tried to fit into. He had always felt like an outsider, like he didn't belong, no matter how much he tried to change himself. And now, as he walked through the streets of the city, he realized that he wasn't running from the life he had built with Vivienne, or the world that had accepted him for a short time. He was running from the life he had been trying to convince himself was the right one. Lucas stopped in front of a park bench, the moonlight casting a soft glow over the scene. The cool night air wrapped around him, and for the first time in days, he felt like he could breathe. He sat down slowly, his hands resting in his lap as he looked up at the sky. The stars were scattered across the dark canvas, distant and indifferent, yet beautiful in their own quiet way. It was in this moment, sitting alone in the stillness of the night, that Lucas had his first true moment of clarity. He wasn't alone because of what he had lost, but because he was finally beginning to understand himself. The man sitting on that bench wasn't the same man who had left the mansion in a fit of anger. This man had come to terms with his past. He had faced the truth of who he was and what he truly wanted out of life. And now, for the first time in years, he felt at peace. He wasn't running anymore. He wasn't running from Vivienne, or the scandal, or the lies. He wasn't running from the world that had tried to make him fit into a mold that wasn't his. He was running from nothing. And that, in itself, was the greatest freedom he could ever experience. Lucas closed his eyes and took a deep breath, the night air filling his lungs. He thought about the future, and for the first time in a long time, he felt hope. Hope that he could rebuild his life, not based on the expectations of others, but on his own terms. It wouldn't be easy. He knew that. There would be challenges, obstacles, and moments of doubt. But the difference now was that Lucas wasn't afraid of those challenges anymore. He wasn't afraid to face the unknown, to step into a world where he could finally be himself. He didn't need the mansion, the wealth, or the approval of others to feel complete. He had everything he needed right here, in this moment, in the truth he had discovered about himself. And as he stood up, the night seemed a little brighter, the world a little smaller. Lucas walked away from the bench, no longer running from his past, but embracing his future. He wasn't sure where he was going or what he would do next. But one thing was certain. He was done running. For the first time, Lucas was free. He was free to be the man he had always been meant to be. And that was all he needed. Lucas had always found solace in the small diner. It wasn't anything fancy, just a humble little spot tucked away on the corner of a quiet street, a place that felt like a secret refuge amidst the chaos of the city. For him, it was more than just a job. It was the place where he could breathe, where he could escape from everything he couldn't control. It had been his sanctuary, his safe space. Long before Vivienne had entered his life, he had always felt comfortable there, among the regular customers, the worn-down booths, and the smell of fresh coffee in the air. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. It was real. And for a man like Lucas, who had spent so long running away from his true self, it was everything he needed. But when Vivienne walked in that day, it felt like the ground beneath him shifted. He hadn't seen her in weeks. Not since he had left the mansion, not since the scandal had consumed both their lives. He hadn't expected her to show up here, in this little diner, of all places. But there she was, standing at the entrance, her eyes scanning the room as she hesitated for a moment. The moment their eyes met, a flood of emotion surged within Lucas. It was the same mix of feelings he had been trying to ignore for so long. Anger, regret, confusion, and something else he couldn't quite name. She had hurt him. She had been the cause of the betrayal he still couldn't fully understand. And yet, when he saw her standing there, all those feelings seemed to dissolve, leaving behind something raw and vulnerable, something that reminded him of the deep connection they had once shared. Vivienne took a few steps forward, her gaze fixed on him, and for the briefest of moments, they just stood there in silence. He could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the weight of everything that had happened, and he felt a pang of sympathy. It was clear that she hadn't been untouched by the scandal, by the mess their lives had become. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke. "Lucas," she said, her voice soft, almost pleading. "I need to talk to you." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Lucas could feel his heart racing, the old feelings threatening to surface. But he remained composed. He had walked away from her once, and he wasn't sure he could do it again. But there was something about her presence in this place, the very place that had been his refuge, that stirred something inside of him. She wanted something. He could see it in her eyes. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice steady despite the turmoil within him. Vivienne hesitated before answering. I've bought the diner, she said quietly. The words hit him like a shockwave, leaving him speechless for a moment. He could barely comprehend what she was saying. Why would she buy the diner? What was her reason for doing this? What did you say? He asked again, his voice rising slightly. I didn't know what else to do, she continued, her eyes not meeting his. I know it's not much, but I wanted to make things right. I wanted to help you. Help you find your way back to what you wanted. Lucas felt his stomach churn at her words. He didn't know what to make of it. He had never been one to accept charity, and this felt like charity. But as he looked at Vivienne, really looked at her, he saw something different. She wasn't offering him money. She wasn't offering him the luxury of her world. What she was offering was something simpler, something more profound. She was offering him a chance to rebuild, to find his way back to the life he had lost when everything had fallen apart. But could he trust her? Could he trust himself? Why? He asked, his voice low. Why would you do this for me? Vivienne took a deep breath before answering. Because you deserve it, Lucas. You deserve to have a life you're proud of. I know I've hurt you, and I can never undo what happened, but I want to help you start over. You were never just a waiter to me. You were never just a part of my world. You were always someone who deserved more. And I think I've finally realized that. Her words hit him like a wave, crashing over him with the force of everything he had been avoiding. For so long, he had been angry at her for the betrayal, angry at himself for letting her in, angry at the world for making him feel like he didn't belong. But now, as he stood there, hearing her words, he felt the walls he had so carefully built around his heart begin to crack. Could this really be redemption? Could he really start over, not just for her, but for himself? I don't know if I can forgive you, Lucas admitted, his voice trembling slightly. But I'm willing to try, for myself, not for you. Vivienne nodded, a faint smile on her lips. That's all I'm asking for. A chance to make things right. Lucas stood there for a moment, his thoughts swirling in his mind. The decision wasn't easy. It wasn't a clear path, and it wasn't something that could be fixed overnight. But as he looked at her, standing there vulnerable and sincere, he realized something. The pain of the past couldn't be erased, but the future, their future, was something he could still choose. And maybe, just maybe, the first step in that future was accepting the opportunity she was offering. A chance to rebuild, a chance to heal, a chance to find his way back to himself. All right, he said finally, his voice firm. I'll stay. I'll stay and see where this goes. Vivienne's eyes lit up with relief, and Lucas could see the sincerity in her expression. It wasn't about fixing everything. It was about starting somewhere, no matter how small that first step was. And for the first time in a long time, Lucas felt a spark of hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, this new beginning could be the one that would finally lead him to the life he was meant to live. The air in the diner was thick with unspoken tension. It had been days since Lucas had agreed to stay, and though the diner felt like home again, something in the back of his mind was unsettled. The rhythms of the cafe had returned, morning rushes, late-night quiet, the steady hum of conversations. He had become used to the routine again. But there was still an odd undercurrent of unease between him and Vivienne. They spoke less than they used to, as though the weight of everything that had happened between them was too heavy to acknowledge. Yet, in the quiet corners of his mind, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Vivienne had been trying to repair their broken bond, but there were moments when her actions didn't quite match her words. The way she seemed a little too eager, a little too perfect, almost as though she was trying to fit into a mold that wasn't her own. Lucas didn't trust her completely. Not yet. Not after everything that had happened. But there was something deeper gnawing at him. Something more unsettling than the silence that had grown between them. One evening, As the last customers were leaving and the lights dimmed over the diner, Lucas noticed Vivienne at the far end of the restaurant, talking quietly to someone on the phone. It wasn't unusual for her to take calls. She was, after all, the new owner of the place. But this conversation was different. It was tense, whispered, and the lines she was speaking felt rehearsed, like she was saying something she didn't want to say. His instincts kicked in. He wasn't the type to eavesdrop, but something about the way she held herself, guarded, tense, made him curious. He had been right to listen. Vivienne had spoken a name, one he hadn't heard in a long time. Her father. His heart dropped. He didn't know much about Vivienne's family, but he knew enough to understand that her father was the kind of man who wielded power like a weapon, who saw people as pawns in his game, the kind of man who wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty. Vivienne had never spoken much about him. Her father had been a shadow in her life, a distant figure whose presence was known only through rumors and stories of ruthless business deals. But hearing her mention his name, the way she spoke to him so urgently, made something click inside Lucas's mind. The pieces were starting to fall into place, and they didn't fit the picture he had imagined. He quietly walked toward the back of the diner, his eyes never leaving Vivienne. It wasn't until he was almost at the kitchen door that he heard her voice rise, sharp and defensive. "No, Dad. I've told you, it's all under control. He's here because he wants to be, not because of what you think." Her words echoed through the quiet space, and Lucas froze. "But you don't understand. I can't do this without him. You're not here. You don't see how much he's changed. He's not the same person you think he is. I need him." Her words were vulnerable, desperate, but they didn't make sense. Why would she need him? Wasn't she the one who had walked away from him? Wasn't she the one who had caused all the damage in the first place? He leaned closer, pressing himself against the wall to listen more carefully, his heart racing. The conversation was picking up speed, but what Vivienne said next made his blood run cold. "I know you have people watching him. I know you've been spying on him for weeks now, but that's over. You need to stop. This isn't just about business anymore. It's about something real, something that—" She stopped suddenly, as if realizing she had said too much. The silence that followed was deafening. Lucas's mind spun, trying to make sense of what he had just heard. Her father had been spying on him? Watching him? For weeks? It didn't make sense. Why? What was his father's role in all this? Was he the one pulling the strings behind the scenes? Was this whole thing, this whole redemption, just another part of a plan Vivienne had been forced to play out? Or had she known all along, letting her father dictate the course of everything, including their relationship? He couldn't fathom the depth of the betrayal he was feeling. If Vivienne had known about the surveillance all along, if she had allowed her father to spy on him, then everything they had shared, everything he had believed about her, was a lie. But as much as he wanted to storm into the room and confront her right then and there, something stopped him. Something told him that there was more to this than what he had heard. Maybe Vivienne wasn't the mastermind behind this after all. Maybe she had been playing a part too, a role she had been forced into. But the truth was, he didn't know what to believe anymore. It was like the ground had been ripped out from under him once again, and he was left scrambling to find his footing. What had started as a glimmer of hope, a potential for redemption, had quickly spiraled into a tangled web of deceit. Just as he was about to retreat, Vivienne's voice broke through the silence again. "I don't know if I can keep doing this, Dad. I don't know if I can keep pretending. But if you can't trust me on this, then I can't do it. I won't." Her voice cracked slightly, a sound of finality in her words. For the first time, Lucas could hear the truth beneath her carefully constructed defenses. She was torn. Torn between her father's demands and her own feelings for him. Torn between what she had been forced to do and what she truly wanted. And in that moment, something shifted inside of Lucas. The anger, the bitterness, all the feelings that had built up over the weeks, they all faded. Because as much as she had hurt him, as much as he felt betrayed, he knew one thing. Vivienne wasn't the enemy. The enemy was the man controlling everything from behind the scenes, the man who had orchestrated it all. Vivienne had been caught in the crossfire. She wasn't the villain. Her father was. With that realization, Lucas made a decision. He wouldn't confront her. Not yet. He needed to understand more, to figure out exactly what was going on before he could say anything. But one thing was certain. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. There was a bigger fight ahead, one that neither of them had seen coming. And no matter what happened, Lucas knew he had to be prepared for it. For the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The courtroom was silent as the judge called for order. The air in the room was thick with tension, the weight of the moment settling over everyone. Lucas sat at the defense table, his palms clammy, heart racing. He had never thought he would find himself here, facing the very people who had tried to destroy him. But here he was. The stakes had never been higher. Vivienne was standing beside him, her eyes red and swollen from days of sleepless nights. But her gaze was unwavering. This wasn't just about their love anymore. This wasn't about the diner or the lies. It was about her father, the man who had pulled the strings in their lives, the man who had orchestrated everything. This was about exposing him for who he truly was, and taking back their lives. Lucas had never felt more helpless in his life, but he wasn't about to back down. Not now. Not after everything they had been through. The courtroom was filled with tension. On one side was Vivienne's father's legal team, a group of well-dressed, confident lawyers, each one standing like soldiers, ready to protect their client at any cost. On the other side were Lucas and Vivienne, a team of two, fighting against the forces that had tried to break them apart. But today, it wasn't just about them. It was about exposing the truth. The truth about the power and manipulation that had governed their lives. The truth about Vivienne's father, a man who had used his wealth and influence to destroy anyone who stood in his way. The doors to the courtroom opened, and the murmurs of the audience grew louder. A figure entered the room. Vivienne's father. He walked in like he owned the place, his presence so commanding that it seemed to suck all the air out of the room. He was dressed in a dark suit, his face an unreadable mask, his eyes cold as ever. He looked like the type of man who could crush anyone beneath his heel without a second thought. His lawyers stood by his side, ready for battle, but it was clear that he wasn't worried. He had always been in control. He had always been the one calling the shots. But today he was about to face the consequences of his actions. As Vivienne's father took his seat, his eyes met Vivienne's for a brief moment. There was no warmth there, only a cold, calculating stare that sent a shiver down Lucas's spine. Vivienne didn't flinch. She stood her ground, her chin held high, a woman ready to fight for what was hers. Her gaze never wavered, and Lucas knew she was no longer the scared girl who had run from her past. She was ready for this. She was ready to expose him. The trial had been ongoing for weeks, but today was the day they were going to put everything on the table. The evidence, the lies, the manipulation. Everything was about to come to light. As the trial unfolded, Vivienne's father's lawyers tried to discredit everything Lucas and Vivienne presented. They painted him as a criminal, a man with a dark past, someone unworthy of Vivienne's love or her family's respect. They twisted the truth, trying to turn the narrative against him, but Vivienne wouldn't let them. She stood strong, telling her story with unwavering confidence, exposing the man who had controlled their lives. She spoke about the surveillance, the manipulation, the way her father had forced her to choose between family loyalty and her own heart. The courtroom was silent as Vivienne laid bare the truth about her father's actions. She spoke about how he had orchestrated the spying on Lucas, how he had tried to tear them apart from the beginning. She spoke about the betrayal and the guilt that had eaten away at her for so long. But most importantly, she spoke about how she had finally chosen to take control of her life. The tears in her eyes were real, and they didn't stop when she turned to Lucas and said, "I'm sorry for everything I've done, but I love you. I always have." The words were simple, but they cut through the tension in the room like a knife. Lucas felt his heart tighten in his chest. This was it. This was the moment that would define their future. This was their chance to set the record straight and make everything right again. The room was still for a moment, and then, like a wave, the truth hit everyone in the courtroom. Vivienne's father was a man who had used his power to manipulate and control, a man who thought he could buy anything, including love. But in the end, love couldn't be bought. It couldn't be manipulated. It couldn't be controlled. It had its own rules. The judge called for a short recess, and Vivienne's father's legal team huddled together, trying to figure out their next move. But Vivienne and Lucas didn't move. They stood there, side by side, waiting. It was like a weight had been lifted from their shoulders. For the first time in what felt like forever, they could breathe. They had finally said the things they needed to say, and they had exposed the truth. The rest of the world was about to see it too. When the judge returned, the room grew quiet once again. The final arguments were made, and the jury began their deliberations. The minutes felt like hours as everyone waited for the verdict. Lucas squeezed Vivienne's hand. She looked up at him, her eyes full of hope. They had done it. They had told the truth. And they had nothing left to fear. The jury returned, and the tension was unbearable. The foreman stood up and delivered the verdict. "We find the defendant, Mr. Edward Sinclair, guilty of all charges." The words echoed through the room, and Lucas felt a rush of relief wash over him. Vivienne's father had been exposed for the man he truly was. The walls that had been built around them had crumbled. The truth had prevailed. And for the first time, Lucas felt the weight of the past fall away. He turned to Vivienne, and for the first time in a long while, they were free. Free from the lies. Free from the manipulation. Free to start over. The judge's voice rang through the room as he declared, "This court is adjourned." The battle was over, but their journey was just beginning. Outside the courtroom, the press waited, eager to hear the next chapter of their story. But Vivienne and Lucas didn't care about the cameras, the reporters, or the spotlight. All that mattered was that they were finally free. And as they walked away from the courthouse, side by side, Lucas knew one thing for certain. This was their new beginning. No more secrets, no more lies, no more manipulation. Just two people, ready to build a future together, free to love without fear. The morning sun filtered through the windows, casting a soft golden light across the diner. Lucas sat at the counter, the familiar hum of the coffee machine filling the air, but everything felt different now. The world outside had changed, but inside, everything felt at peace. He hadn't expected his life to turn out this way. He had never imagined he would go from a simple waiter to a man who had fought for love, for truth, and for the chance to start anew. The past few months had been a whirlwind, and yet, standing here now, Lucas couldn't help but feel like the luckiest man alive. It wasn't because he had everything he ever dreamed of. It wasn't the money, the status, or even the court victory. It was because he had found something far more precious. Something that had always been right in front of him, waiting for him to see it. Love. True love. The kind of love that was unshakable, even in the face of everything that had tried to tear them apart. The door opened with a soft chime, and Lucas's heart skipped a beat as Vivienne stepped inside. She was wearing a simple, flowy dress, her hair loose around her shoulders, and as she walked toward him, the weight of everything seemed to lift. The past was finally behind them. The battles had been fought, the lies had been exposed, and the truth had come to light. But now, it was time for them to heal, to move forward, to love without fear. She smiled at him, and Lucas felt his heart settle. He had always known there was something special about her, something that had drawn him to her from the very beginning. But now, it was as if everything made sense. She wasn't just the girl he had fallen in love with. She was the woman who had changed his life in ways he never thought possible. The woman who had shown him what it meant to truly fight for love. She had been through so much, and yet here she was, standing before him, stronger than ever. The woman who had been torn between loyalty to her family and her heart, who had lived under the shadow of her father's control, had finally broken free. And as she stood there now, there was no more fear in her eyes, only strength, only a sense of belonging. She sat beside him, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. There was nothing that needed to be said, nothing that could sum up the journey they had been on. But then, Vivienne turned to Lucas, her expression soft but full of meaning. "Lucas," she began, her voice steady but full of emotion. "I want you to know something." Lucas turned to her, sensing that this moment was important. That this was the moment that would close the chapter on everything they had been through. That this was where everything would come together. "What is it?" he asked, his voice quiet but filled with anticipation. Vivienne took a deep breath, her fingers lightly brushing his. "You've changed my life," she said, her voice breaking slightly as the words left her lips. "Before I met you, I didn't know what real freedom was. I didn't know what it meant to love without fear. You taught me that. You showed me that love isn't just about standing by someone. It's about fighting for them, even when everything else is against you. You didn't give up on me. And because of you, I can finally see who I am. I'm no longer living in my father's shadow." Lucas's heart clenched as he listened to her words. He had never thought of himself as someone capable of changing someone's life, especially not someone as strong as Vivienne. But hearing her say it made him realize that, in the end, it wasn't just about the grand gestures or the battles they had fought. It was about the small moments, the quiet choices, the way they had supported each other through everything. And in that moment, Lucas knew that he had changed her life in the same way she had changed his. She had given him a purpose, a reason to believe in something bigger than himself, to believe in love, to believe in second chances, to believe in the possibility of a future together. He squeezed her hand gently, looking into her eyes, and said, "Vivienne, you've changed my life too." Her eyes filled with tears at his words, and he could see the weight of everything they had been through lift off her shoulders. The road hadn't been easy. There had been moments of doubt, moments of pain, moments when they thought they might lose each other. But through it all, they had found their way back. And now, standing here in this small diner, they were both free. Free from the lies, the manipulation, the fear. Free to love each other without hesitation, without anything holding them back. "I never thought I'd find someone who would fight for me the way you did," Vivienne continued, her voice thick with emotion. "I didn't know that love could feel like this, strong, real, something that you don't have to hide or apologize for. You made me realize that I deserve to be loved, just as I am. And I want to spend the rest of my life showing you that you've always been enough." Lucas felt the tears in his own eyes as he held her hand, his heart bursting with love for her. They had both come so far, and now they had found their way back to each other. He knew they would face challenges ahead. Life wasn't always going to be easy, but for the first time, he was ready. Ready to face whatever came their way, because they weren't just surviving anymore, they were living, together. "You don't have to say anything," Lucas whispered, his voice full of emotion. "Just know that I'm never going anywhere. I'll be by your side, always." And as they sat there holding hands, the weight of the world lifted from their shoulders. The past was behind them. The future was theirs to build. They didn't need any more grand gestures or dramatic declarations. The simple truth was enough. They loved each other. And that was all that mattered. The world outside would never be the same. But in this moment, in this diner, it was as if time had stopped. They were just two people, two souls, who had found each other in the most unexpected of ways. And as the sun rose higher in the sky, Lucas knew that no matter what came next, they had each other. And that was the greatest gift of all. They were ready for whatever came their way, because they were no longer afraid. They had each other. And that was enough. As the sun began to set, casting an orange glow over the horizon. The quiet hum of the diner seemed to melt into the background. The world outside was still, calm, almost surreal, like it had been waiting for this moment to unfold. Lucas and Vivienne sat across from each other at their usual booth, now more than just a waiter and his former mystery guest. They were partners, survivors of a world that had tried to tear them apart, but somehow had only brought them closer. The soft clink of coffee cups, the quiet chatter of customers in the distance, and the faint sound of a car driving by outside were all part of the peaceful symphony they had found together. But there was one final question that lingered in the air. A question that had been asked before, but this time, it wasn't just about them. It was about the choices we make when we're faced with the unknown. Would you be willing to save a stranger? Would you risk everything you know to protect someone you've never met, someone who might not even ask for your help, but whose life could change with a single act of kindness? Vivienne looked at Lucas, her eyes filled with a kind of peace that only came after facing so many storms. The world had tried to define her, to shape her into something she wasn't. But now, she knew who she was. She had found her strength, her voice, and her love. And now, she wasn't afraid to share it with the world. "Lucas," she said, her voice calm but carrying a deeper weight. "Do you ever wonder what your life would be like if you hadn't stepped in that day? If you hadn't decided to help me?" Lucas smiled softly, his fingers brushing against hers as he took a slow breath. He remembered the first time he saw her, the woman in distress, crying in a dark corner of that alley, and how instinctively he had stepped forward without thinking of the consequences. It had been a moment of vulnerability for both of them, and yet, somehow, it had led them here. Stronger, united, ready for whatever came next. "I don't think I would be the man I am today without that decision," he replied quietly. "I'd probably still be wandering through life, thinking that what I did didn't matter. But in the end, it was the choice to act, to save someone, that made all the difference." His words hung in the air, as if challenging not just Vivienne, but everyone who might be watching their journey unfold. The truth was simple. The choice to save someone, even a stranger, had the power to change everything. "And what if no one had been there?" Vivienne asked softly, her voice almost a whisper now. "What if there had been no one to pull me out of that darkness, to help me when I needed it the most?" Lucas leaned in, his gaze locking with hers, and for the first time in a long time, he felt the weight of those words. He understood now, more than ever, that helping someone wasn't just an act of kindness. It was an act of courage. "That's why we do it," he said, his voice firm yet gentle. "We save people because we can. Because at the end of the day, none of us are truly strangers. We're all just people, trying to make it through the day, trying to find our way back to something real. So, what would you do? Would you save a stranger?" The question lingered in the air, and for a moment, it seemed as if time stood still. The world outside, the troubles, the chaos, it all seemed so far away now. In this small diner, surrounded by the warm glow of their love and the choices they had made, Lucas and Vivienne found their purpose. They had learned that the real power of change lay in the smallest actions, the ones no one noticed, the ones that didn't come with applause or recognition. The decision to care, to step into someone else's pain, to reach out even when it was difficult. To save, not just because you could, but because you knew that's what mattered most in the end. Lucas stood up, extending his hand to Vivienne with a soft smile on his face. As he did, he turned to face the diner, looking at the customers who had unknowingly been part of their story. He wasn't a hero in the traditional sense. He wasn't someone who had to make headlines or be celebrated. But to Vivienne, to the people who knew him, he was a man who had made the right choice, who had done the right thing when it counted. And that, he knew, was enough. "Maybe it's not about the big things," Lucas mused. "Maybe it's about the little things we do when no one's looking. The decisions we make when we're faced with the unknown. And when you're faced with that choice, whether it's to help someone or not, whether it's to risk your own comfort for another, what will you choose? Vivienne stood beside him, taking his hand as they both turned toward the door. Outside, the world awaited them, but in that moment, they knew they had already found what they needed. The real question wasn't about saving a stranger. It was about saving the world around them, one small act at a time. With a soft, contented smile, Vivienne looked at Lucas one last time and said, "What we did, it changed everything. For us. For them. For everyone who's still trying to find their way." Lucas nodded in agreement, his hand gently squeezing hers. "And now, it's your turn." As the door closed behind them, the question remained, echoing in the air, leaving the world to ponder. Would you save a stranger? It wasn't just a question for Lucas and Vivienne. It was a question for everyone. For you. For me. For all of us. And as the soft music began to play in the background, fading into the distance, we were left with one simple truth. The choices we make define us. And sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness can change a life forever.